Let's get to Sixers Nets. The way we're going to do this, we'll just bounce around with our biggest questions or thoughts about this series. And so I will throw it to you to begin this one. Just what are you really thinking about as you go into Sixers Nets?
Yeah, so I started doing prep for these. The first thing I did was just what's my nutshell reaction? What's my overarching, overly broad thought on each series? And so for this one, it's that essentially Brooklyn is 11-13 since the All-Star break. Kyle Kuzma, I think, pointed some of that out to Spencer Dinwiddie in their which is to say that the Nets' overall record has a little bit to do with the guys that used to be on the team. And so that's just to say that Brooklyn has not been a good team. There have been interesting aspects to its season after the trade deadline, but it's under 500. Offense is number 24 in the league, and ultimately they do not have the bodies to contend with Joel Embiid. And so that's where I start. I just see this being a short series where the best player in it is not going to meet enough resistance to be slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
But there are definitely different ways we could go, trying to point out Sixers weaknesses or what might work for Brooklyn on either end of the floor. But that's my overwhelming sense of the series. It's not super complicated. So I mean, maybe if you feel differently, or if you want to just take the first plunge into some more granular stuff, I would flip it to you. But do you see? I mean, that seems like the simplest analysis of this series is that Embiid is there. The Nets don't have what it's going to take to stop him from doing Embiid stuff.
I'm with you on everything you said, and that's how I looked at this series initially. But I decided to approach it as what could go wrong for Philly or be done right for Brooklyn that would turn this series into, I think everyone's going to say Sixers in 4 or 5 would be the prevailing, and we'll get to our predictions, but I think that'll be the prevailing pick. So some of the things I landed on, there's the Brooklyn Bigs versus Embiid matchup. Day'Ron Sharpe is a very big human. He's like 265 pounds. Offensive rebounds the hell out of the ball. We know the Sixers have had their problems with defensive rebounding. Is he an okay matchup for Embiid? I also went back and looked at the regular season, and I think this surprised me. And it's a small sample size, under 70 possessions. But when Nick Claxton defended Joel Embiid in the regular season, the Nets as a team, the Sixers as a team, averaged 0.94 points per possession, which is not good. Now, they no longer have Kevin Durant, who was a huge part of their help defense before he got injured and was ultimately traded. There's that factor. And I think over the course of just a series, Nick Claxton's given up like 60 pounds to Joel Embiid. Yeah. And so that's not going to hold. And so I kind of write that off, but I did find it fascinating that even under the previous iteration of the Nets, because like you do have Dorian Finney-Smith. And so if you try to make him your Kevin Durant and use Nick Claxton the way that you're going to use him, but I ultimately don't ascribe too much value to that. Do you, that number?
Not really. I did have the same thought of how does it look in a hypothetical where the Nets make this more interesting? I don't think they can win it, but what needs to happen? I think Claxton making Embiid guard him a little bit out on the floor, because one of the improvements Claxton made this year was he's gotten so much better as 15, 18 feet. He can take one dribble and get to the rim and beat most centers because he's quick. You can fake handoffs, like that kind of stuff. So that's one. And maybe you pick up like 2 fouls on Embiid in the first quarter, something like that, where he's just a little lazy and reaches. And, that's one way to do it. I think just generally speaking, it seems like a pretty obvious move for the Nets to just find Harden in space and attack him defensively. Like I just try to make him involved in every action. That's going to be a theme for me, is just, if you're looking for the underdog to do something surprising, you just have to find a weak point and just exploit it to whatever extent you can. So that's another one. I don't know. I think you might say like Embiid's going to be in a drop most of the game. So if the Nets guards can run hot on pull-up threes, if Embiid's not out to contest and the ball handler defender doesn't get close enough, like I could see that. There's just a lot of stuff that's got to go right. I think a few too many of those things for Brooklyn to win.
I actually do have that circled though with Embiid and drop. And It was to that point, the Nets post Mikal Bridges debut were in the top 10 of long mid-range frequency and accuracy. And so is that their path to, if Embiid is going to be in the drop, you just count on him, Spencer Dinwiddie, depending on how many minutes, some of their other guards are just going to play, or wing players, or whoever you kind of trust to take shots on this team right now, where, Cam Johnson even has like a little bit of the pull-up game to him. Does Cam Thomas get any minutes in this series? You have Patty Mills. Royce O'Neal, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, depending on how many minutes those guys play. However, you mentioned the James Harden point. This team really isn't built to attack the James Harden mismatch because who is doing it? The Nets were in the bottom 5 of rim pressure after the Mikal Bridges trade. And there's just nothing that's going to suggest that. I mean, and Joel Beach is always going to be in the vicinity when he's on the floor. So your best bet, I think, at generating rim pressure is, can you have Nick Claxton get after it when Embiid's not on the court, but you need his minutes to mirror Embiid's minutes, I would say. And so that's sort of the other problem. And it led me to just wondering, is the Nets is the two things that I could see, and they're both James Harden related, but it's on the offensive end. One, what does James Harden look like with his Achilles? Is can he attack mismatches? And even how many mismatches does he get? Because the Nets, they're rangy and athletic on the wings. Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, Mikal Bridges himself. Like those are, even Spencer Dinwiddie can make him work on certain possessions. And so if you're able to not, I don't look at this as a team that neutralizes James Harden, and it's tough to parse the end of the regular season and say, well, James Harden ran hot and cold. He missed some time. The Sixers, even though they were playing a tough schedule, weren't in a ton of high stakes games during that closing kick. Like they kind of knew where they were going to settle for the playoffs. But if James Harden isn't, we can go through James Harden's playoff resume, but even last year when the whole, the ball didn't find me, he ran hot and cold then, he was still able to and he was dealing with hamstring stuff, put defenses in rotation, make good passes. If he's just limited or just really dealing with an Achilles issue and banged up, does that give the Nets a puncher's chance? Or are you just able to pivot to Tyrese Maxey's blazing fast, just give him the ball in those catch and go situations and they'll be fine?
Yeah, I think even without the Achilles, I would expect this to be not necessarily a big series for Harden because one, I mean, the Sixers are just going to try to eat with Embiid at the elbows and Harden's just going to give it to him and get out of the way. I think if you get switches, if you're setting screens with Embiid on Harden's man, I think Claxton is more than capable of staying in front of Harden. So like, I don't see a lot of isolation scoring or foul drawing from Harden. I don't see big numbers because that's, to your point, the Nets do have a lot of wing guys. They can just feel very good about handling Harden, anywhere on the floor. Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith, like Harris has the size even because Harden is not blazing fast anymore. Cam Johnson should be fine. So I don't see Harden having a big series. I don't think he needs to, but I think if you want to flip to the other end, other than Dinwiddie. So let's say, because the Sixers can kind of get a little switchy and you sort of have to 1 through 4 because Harden is just a terrible screen navigator. Other than Dinwiddie. So let's say, the Nets hit like 3 pull-up threes in the first quarter because Embiid's in a drop. And now we need to blitz Dinwiddie, assuming that's who it is, to get the ball out of his hands. I'm not sure. I think I see anyone else on the Nets consistently making plays like in an advantage situation after Dinwiddie's gotten off the ball or whoever is getting doubled gets off the ball because Bridges has been awesome, but he's still, if there's some distance for him to go yet, it's still as a passer. Like he's not an intuitive, make the right decision right away kind of passer yet. So I think this is bad that a lot of this series kind of seems to depend on Dinwiddie because like, who do you think is the guy that's gonna, it gets out of Dinwiddie's hands because the Sixers sent 2 at him and somebody else has it. Who do you want catching the ball in that situation that's going to run the second side pick and roll or straight line drive or whatever? Like, I don't feel great about almost any of Brooklyn's options with no disrespect to Bridges, but he's just made tons of shots and scored in isolation. It's not quite like he's going to run your offense when he has to.
I would say probably Patty Mills, but I don't know how many minutes you expect him to play. And so if it's not him, is it Royce O'Neal? Like, is that the guy?
You don't feel good about that, right?
No,
That's just, I mean, it's not a revelation to say like the Nets don't have a lot of great options because they're not as good of a team. But I think for me, I think the way this has to work for Brooklyn offensively is 1, they hit those pull-up threes. 2, if the Sixers have to change anything, which kind of seems unlikely, you're generating corner threes in advantage situations where you just dump it to the roll guy and he finds Patty Mills in the corner or he finds Joe Harris on the wing or whatever. That if I close my eyes, I can imagine that being a way that the Nets score enough. But I don't know. I'm ready. Do we need to, is there anything else you wanted to hit on this before we make our picks and move to the next one?
Does the Ben Simmons absence factor, would he have nudged the needle defensively for the Nets for you at all? Or more importantly, will he wear orange pants at all on the sidelines during this series?
Yeah, pant color is probably the bigger variable than what he would do for this. I think he's just kind of duplicative to what Brooklyn has a lot of already, which are good defenders. Because I think offensively, you put him out there, you might say, well, that's the guy you want to throw it to if you're getting it out of a double team, but then like he's not going to shoot it. So I'm not that concerned. No, I don't think his presence or absence really matters that much, which is kind of a bummer. That sort of encapsulates where we are in the Ben Simmons experience.
I hope he ends up just in like fucking Charlotte or San Antonio and is able to reboot like low stakes, like Markelle Fultz in Orlando. I hope that's what happens.
Yeah.
What's your Nets Sixers series prediction?
I'll just go Sixers in 5. I think it's probably closer to a sweep than a 6-game series to me. If I had to say which way I was leaning on that 5 game.
I'm going to go Sixers in 5 too, which I think we can call the coward's pick because it really should just be Sixers in 4, but the non-Embiid minutes are still dicey. And if you decide to go, you can go bigger with Paul Reed as the backup 5, but you could go smaller with PJ Tucker, but I don't envy PJ Tucker having to like guard. Can you imagine him guarding Day'Ron Sharp, who's played a lot more for Brooklyn, and he's just going to clean up he's going to be a Hoover on the offensive glass. So I'll go with Sixers in 5.